Stern has become such a wussified sycophant, he doesn't realize that telling Kamala that he'd vote for a wall is telling her that he knows she's as dumb as one. I mean, not to mention, Trump is the wall candidate, not Cackle's McKnee pads. Stern got even more pathetic, wondering how she doesn't nap.
That brings me to Howard Stern and his interview of Kamala Harris, where he put the cards on the table about how he was feeling, in particular about her latest media tour, which did not include Saturday Night Live, but she was lampooned on it a little. A lampoon may be too strong, but she was mocked, as they usually do, just to Republicans. Take a listen.
Greg Gutfeld and Megyn Kelly didn't just dent Howard Stern's long-guarded legacy. They tore it down like a wrecking crew with a personal score to settle. With Greg's razor-edged sarcasm slicing through every layer and Megyn's precise, almost surgical dissection, they revealed the shocking transformation of radio's once fearless rebel into a pampered, polished shadow of the man he used to be. The firebrand who once thrived on chaos has become a celebrity confidant, whispering soft praises where he once roared. Stern's fall from grace wasn't merely mocked, it was utterly annihilated. This wasn't commentary, it was the complete demolition of a myth, and they made certain no microphone was spared.
This is what keeps me up at night. I don't understand how my fellow Americans, I don't even understand how this election is close. And yes, I'm voting for you, but I would also vote for that wall over there. When you said you don't nap, I get it, because like what you've taken on is extraordinarily difficult. And I mean, do you feel the pressure of the moment in the sense that, like when I met you out in the hall, I said, I'm really nervous because I want this to go well for you. I want it to go well for the country. Even when I watch them on Saturday Night Live with the, where they have Maya Rudolph playing you, I hate it. I don't want you being made fun of.
Greg Gutfeld stepped into the spotlight with that sly, knowing grin, the kind that signaled something explosive was about to drop. But this wasn't just another playful jab at politicians or a rant about pop culture mishaps. This time, his sights were set squarely on Howard Stern, the self-proclaimed king of all media, the shock jock who once gave FCC regulators sleepless nights and left soccer moms nervously clutching their coffee mugs, was now under Greg's unflinching gaze. And Greg didn't just roast him, he dragged him back through time, unearthed the receipts, and held them up against the dimming light of a man who once embodied rebellion.
Period, while listening to it. You should hear what keeps him up at night.
Greg began by marveling at Howard's drastic transformation, from the gritty, sharp-tongued anti-hero of radio to a Botoxed, bathrobe-wrapped imitation of an NPR host moonlighting in therapy podcasts. He joked that watching Howard today feels like discovering your favorite punk rocker has opened a luxury spa in the Hamptons, serving organic tea and giving speeches on emotional wellness. Greg laughed as he recalled the days when Stern mocked everything: politicians, celebrities, political correctness. Nothing escaped his fire.
She also appeared on Howard Stern, where he said he'd even vote for a wall over Trump. Harris replied, "I'm not a wall, but I am plastered."
Now, Greg pointed out, Stern sips green juice while apologizing for the very jokes that made him famous. Greg didn't just accuse Stern of selling out. He claimed Stern sold the booth, the mic, the headphones, and even threw in his backbone for good measure. He compared the old Stern to a wrecking ball and the new Stern to a delicate interpretive dancer who only moves after getting legal approval. Greg laughed at the irony. Stern now preaches tolerance and personal growth, yet his archives are packed with material that makes today's Howard look like he's locked in a battle with the ghost of his former self.
But it is incredibly brave to take this stance after you've made $300, $400 million not being woke, right? Loving Donald Trump, exploiting the mentally ill, wearing blackface. Look at the crop of woke comics, whether it's Stern or Jimmy Kimmel, his BFF, Sarah Silverman, Joy Behar, Michael Ian Black. What do they all have in common? They wore blackface. And then they went woke. It's not a chicken or egg thing there. You know what order it came.
Then Greg went straight for the core of the hypocrisy. For years, Stern built his image as the unfiltered voice of truth, the fearless outsider who wouldn't bow to anyone. But once he secured his massive Sirius XM fortune and surrounded himself with celebrity friends, he transformed into exactly what he used to mock. Now he's a pampered insider, shielded by assistants and cushioned by carefully scripted interviews. Stern didn't just stroll from punk rock to polite conversation. He sprinted from rebellion to public relations in record time.
Now remember, Stern used to throw bologna slices at strippers' butts. With accuracy, I might add. Now he's worried the possible leader of the free world can't handle his verbal foot rub. I wonder if he used to get this nervous for the strippers before he'd spank them on their bare asses with a dead fish.
Greg ridiculed how Stern, once allergic to Hollywood's fakery, now rolls out the red carpet for A-listers, stroking their egos like a seasoned concierge at an exclusive awards gala. The raw, unpredictable radio of the past has been replaced with a polished publicity circuit, where actors arrive to be flattered, and Stern nods along like a therapist protecting his 5-star rating. Greg described Stern's studio as a haunted mansion of fading relevance, dim lighting, moody tones, and a voice that now sounds less rebellious and more like a luxury car advertisement. He quipped that Stern hasn't simply aged. He's transformed into a wax figure of himself, preserved by nostalgia and hair dye. Greg even joked that the most shocking part of today's Stern is that anyone who remembers his 1990s persona can listen now without bursting into flames from secondhand embarrassment. The so-called king of all media spends more time lamenting social norms than shattering them, a shift Greg found both hilarious and tragic. Then he passed the torch to Megyn Kelly. If Greg was the firecracker, Megyn was the scalpel, ready to cut deep.
Okay, I hope you had a good week. I did, and no thanks to Howard Stern. True, the New York Post reported that Stern hit a chic restaurant in NYC with a crew of A-listers, including Jimmy Kimmel, Jennifer Aniston, Jon Hamm, Justin Theroux, Jason Bateman. I was not invited. I guess because my first name doesn't begin with the letter J.
Megyn began by saying Stern's slide from rebel to relic wasn't surprising. It was inevitable. She argued that rebellion without principle always collapses into compromise. Stern, she claimed, was never truly courageous, just loud, and when ratings no longer demanded outrage, he let it fade away. She explained how his so-called evolution wasn't about wisdom or growth. It was about survival, about clinging to a place at the elite media table. In the process, he abandoned the audience that made him a legend. The original Stern mocked conformity. The new Stern sells it, neatly wrapped in podcast branding. Megyn didn't hold back on his reinvention, pointing out that no one was asking for a sensitive Howard Stern, rebranded as America's late-in-life therapist. People wanted honesty, grit, and unapologetic edge. Instead, they got a Howard who whispers about enlightenment between celebrity chats that feel more like Beverly Hills group therapy. She zeroed in on his sudden moral compass. The man who thrived on chaos now lectures others about offensiveness, as if the world forgot the mountain of shock radio carnage in his past. This wasn't redemption, she said. It was revisionism. Stern trying to rewrite his own history with a highlighter in one hand and a Sharpie in the other.
There's too much at stake. I believe the entire future of this country right now, I mean, as America, land of the free, home of the brave, I think it's literally on the line.
I agree with you.
And when I see them, how did you react to the Saturday Night Live bit?
Here's Stern on anyone daring to poke a little fun at Kamala.
Even when I watch them on Saturday Night Live with the where they have Maya Rudolph playing you, I hate it. I don't want you being made fun of.
Oh my God.
There's too much at stake. I believe the entire future of this country right now, I mean, as America, land of the free, home of the brave, I think it's literally on the line.
So a guy who's supposed to be funny for a living now claims her candidacy is too important to joke about.
Megyn locked in on the irony. Howard Stern, the man who once led the fight against censorship, now hides behind political correctness as if it were his shield. She said he didn't just join the establishment, he was consumed by it. The shock jock who once mocked virtue signaling now wears it like a badge of honor. She compared the old Stern to a roaring lion and the new Stern to a declawed house cat, purring for approval from the very people who once branded him toxic. This wasn't evolution. It was retreat. Not for wisdom, but for acceptance. Megyn called out his hypocrisy, noting how he still tries to play the outsider while living in a mansion, mingling with elites, and lecturing average Americans about empathy and progress. The man who once tore down the walls of political correctness now builds fences around his own privilege and calls it transformation. She laughed at how Stern treats his past like an ex he refuses to acknowledge, dodging decades of outrageous antics as if they belonged to someone else. But Megyn reminded everyone, the old Stern built the empire. The new Stern is merely renting the penthouse. And she didn't stop there, questioning how a man who once vowed to speak truth to power now spends most of his airtime agreeing with them. His voice, she said, no longer sparks rebellion. It's background noise, quietly auditioning for a seat on a CNN panel.
Well, I just saw it, actually, and it was funny. I am a huge fan of Maya Rudolph's. I think she put a lot of time into doing the piece and the character.
Okay, so I do think it's interesting. He's very scared. A lot of I hear this from a lot of my Democrat friends. They're scared of Trump winning again. They're scared of Trump.
Nothing in Stern's previous career that could withstand this modern witch hunt that he now embraces. So this is a form of restitution. Maybe he says, if I'm woke too, the crocodile will eat me last, but they always do eat. But I get it. He flipped from populist to elitist because now he's with elitists. He's living in the Hamptons. What would the Stern of now think of the Stern of before?
Megyn's tone sharpened as she reminded everyone that Stern's legacy was built on making people uncomfortable in ways that provoked real conversation. But now he's terrified of discomfort. He's afraid of labels, of criticism, of stepping even slightly outside the safe lines drawn by the establishment he's desperate to please. Then she delivered her knockout punch. Stern didn't grow. He shrank. He folded himself into the comfort of wealth, praise, and elite approval, all while pretending he's still the same fearless man behind the mic. The truth, she said, is that the filter is still there. It's just written into his contract now. Greg jumped back in for one last jab, saying, Stern is like a comedian who's lost his punchline, but still insists on telling the joke. Every episode feels like a desperate plea to be taken seriously by a world that never asked him to be serious in the first place. Greg even imagined Stern's future as less of a talk show and more of a retirement home radio hour, where guests lounge in bathrobes, sip tea, and talk about their feelings, forgetting they were once entertaining. The revolution Stern claimed to lead has long passed him by, leaving only a faint echo, fading quietly behind a gold-plated microphone.
Right after the Columbine massacre that the killers should have raped the students before killing them. Not that I like that Stern, but this pendulum swing from saying the most tasteless thing in the universe to putting your balls in a Tic Tac container. You got to wonder what's going on here. It's striking that the king of the most misogynistic humor ever now turns into a breathless over a progressive, hopelessly shallow candidate.
Megyn agreed, saying Stern's greatest tragedy wasn't just his so-called evolution. It was that he betrayed his own identity for a seat at the very table he once flipped over for fun. He didn't become wise. He became quiet, not for peace, but for permission. And in the world of radio legends, relevance has an expiration date. One Stern may have already passed. Greg couldn't resist taking one last swipe at the crumbling monument of Howard Stern. He said the funniest part isn't even Stern's fall from grace. It's how blissfully unaware Stern seems to be about it. In Greg's words, Stern is trapped in a soundproof booth of self-delusion, still imagining himself as the outsider, the rebel, the provocateur, while the rest of the world sees him blending right in with the establishment he once mocked for sport. Greg painted him as a man who used to run toward controversy like a moth to a flamethrower, now retreating from it like it's a bad Yelp review. Once, Stern broadcast with brass knuckles. Now it's soft gloves and hushed tones, the kind of show that comes with a weighted blanket and a cup of chamomile tea. He's no longer the king of all media. He's the duke of all disclaimers.
This is Stern's self-imposed penance for subjugating women to demoralizing stunts, capitalizing on desperate females thirsting for attention, even if it's from an oily paddle striking their bare asses. True, much of Stern's transformation is based mainly on a delusional hatred for Trump, but it's also coming from a bottomless hatred for himself and his past.
Greg mocked how Stern now fills entire segments with therapy talk, emotional breakthroughs, and endless tales of his spiritual journey, which somehow always circle back to how misunderstood he feels. Greg laughed, saying it's no longer a radio show, it's an audiobook no one requested, narrated by a man desperate to prove that relevance means echoing whatever's trending on Twitter. Then Megyn stepped in for her final strike, calm, precise, and unshakable. She said the real disappointment is that Stern had the platform, the reach, and the nerve to question everything. Yet now, questions nothing. He went from confronting the mob to bending over backward to join it, not because he believed in its rules, but because he feared being left behind. She reminded everyone that Stern built his career on defiance, but now defines himself by how politely he can toe the line. In doing so, he's become a ghost of his former self. A cautionary tale of what happens when rebellion is traded for comfort and authenticity is sold for applause. Megyn stressed that Stern doesn't need to apologize for growing older, but pretending that growth means erasing the past and acting as if it never existed isn't integrity. It's weakness. And when your entire brand was built on brutal honesty, abandoning it for validation is the ultimate betrayal.
Howard's simply redefining masculinity. And why is it always the male lefties who are so desperate to get rid of masculinity entirely? It's guilt and self-preservation. Because scrape beneath the surface of any liberal male and what do you find? A creep, terrified of his priggish past. Piggish past, I mean, not priggish. What is priggish?
Greg nodded, closing it out in his signature style. Sharp, cutting, and impossible to forget. He said Howard Stern didn't just leave the building, he rebuilt it, lined the walls with mirrors, and now spends his days admiring his own reflection in the very space he once vowed to tear down. And that's the tragedy. Not simply that Stern changed, but that he forgot who he was. The shock jock became a sanctuary host. The provocateur turned into a people-pleaser. The once deafening voice of rebellion reduced to a faint echo inside a velvet-lined recording booth. Because when the king stops leading the charge and starts begging for applause, the kingdom doesn't crumble. It just stops listening. And that silence is louder than anything Stern could ever scream into a microphone.